Well, I'm excited to share this new publication with you all that we worked on with a couple other Utah organizations that we hope will prove to be useful to a variety of stakeholders who are working to increase wind and solar energy production in the West. And I guess the first question is, how did a group like Wild Utah Project, which is a nonprofit conservation science research group, end up being first author on a best management practices document for renewable energy? Well, by way of a little history, we actually have a history in writing both science-based and land management agency-based best management practices for other land uses, such as off-road vehicle uses, in this case on forest lands. In the case of these ORV BMPs, we and our partner Wideland CPR identified about a half dozen years ago a real hole in the U.S. Forest Service's travel planning process, in that the Washington office was directing all of the national forests to basically amend their travel plans in light of this explosion of both legal and illegal off-road vehicle use on the forests. Yet the agency had issued no standard agency-issued guidance document to assist the ranger districts in doing the travel planning, in addressing things like ORV trail closures and creation of new trails, or ORV management or ORV monitoring. And so we basically wrote the guidance document for them to fill this gaping hole. And we were pleasantly surprised a couple years ago when the Forest Service came to us and asked us to waive the copyright on this document, because they were hoping to lift big chunks of it into their new Forest Service off-highway vehicle framework, management framework document, the point of which was to assist with these travel plan revisions. So while all that was going on, as many of you probably know, here in Utah, the Utah Renewable Energy Zone initiative was underway. And one of our partners, Western Resource Advocates, who we were just talking about a minute ago, noticed that while another one of our partners, Utah Clean Energy, was an active participant in the UREZ, what was missing in the process was a serious level of involvement by a conservation group who had expertise in wildlands, wildlife habitats. The thinking being that if the UREZ did what we all hoped and spurred additional solar and wind development in Utah, we wanted to make sure there was a voice at the table trying to ensure that it was done right by wildlife and smart from the start. So Western Resource Advocates helped bring my organization into the process via a pass-through grant, and I started going to all the UREZ meetings. And I quickly found myself asking, other conservationists working in the West, I said, is there some sort of, primer or hand-holding or guidance document that all the conservationists are using to collectively and proactively, positively affect all this renewable energy development? And what I quickly learned was that we had the opposite problem here than we faced with the Forest Service and the ORV BMPs, where the Forest Service basically had nothing. In this case, there were literally dozens upon dozens of these BMP documents and guidance documents out on the street. Some focused more on wind, some focused just on solar. Some written by agencies, some written by scientists, some written by other conservation groups, some written by consultants working for industry. Some focused on kind of that upfront regulatory, administrative, legal process where all the permitting's done. Some focused on the nuts and bolts of actual construction. Some just for birds, some just for bats. Some that offer real BMPs, some that don't. Those that do, some are grounded in science, some are grounded in agency expertise or regulation. So we realized what we needed to do was to go through all these documents and pick out all the useful stuff for the conservation community and summarize and synthesize all of this into kind of a one-stop shopping document that is easy to read, that is understandable, almost more for the level of lay people. But we knew that if we did this well, we would have a document that could prove to be useful also to industry and developers and possibly even agencies. We knew we really had to cover that legal, administrative, regulatory framework within which renewable development occurs within. So it would be very clear to conservationists where they're able to insert themselves in the process. And since my organization is a very science-focused group, we knew we had to get our hands on all the studies we can find on the impacts of wind and solar development on wildlife, so that any best management practices that we put forth in our document could be tied right back to the scientific literature. And so after many months, and with the help of many amazing experts and other conservationists, we came up with a publication-ready and distribution-ready draft of the BMPs this past spring. And I think what I'll do next is go through the main gist and framework of this document. And those of you who saw our poster yesterday, we had copies of the BMPs out there, and I brought them in here, and you're welcome to come take one. In fact, I'll have an easier time getting back to the parking garage if you all clean me out here, and it might help if you flip through it as I go through. And so we open the document with this legal and regulatory and administrative framework that surrounds the renewable development. We go through the various executive orders that pertain to renewables, MOUs between agencies, energy-specific legislation. Again, for example, the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which mentions the goal of new renewable energy on public lands to the tune of 10,000 megawatts by 2015. And the nice thing is that we're on track to greatly surpass this goal and possibly double it. We spend a lot of time in this section on the Bureau of Land Management and its regulations that pertain to renewable development, partly because many of the wind and solar projects coming down the pike on public lands are destined for BLM lands. And so we dig pretty deeply into both the wind and solar programmatic environmental impact statements for the BLM and what these documents mean in terms of amending resource management plans, issuing right-of-ways, NEPA analysis at the site level. We even have a whole special section just on land use planning as it pertains to renewable development. Since our document is very wildlife focused, we go into the applicable federal laws like the Endangered Species Act that come into play with renewables. Of course, there's many others. We do touch on the state level of things regarding permitting and regulation, and then we go through some of the typical steps that a developer has to go through, ranging from citing a project to applying for and receiving the proper permits, to developing a plan of operation, and hopefully being in permit compliance. Next, we get into the actual BMPs, starting with siting. In this case, lands where you should try to put solar and wind developments. And I want to stress that all of the BMPs in our document are an amalgamation of many others. And we kind of went back and forth as to whether would we cite each of our BMPs to all the other sources that it came from? And we went back and forth with our writing and reviewing and editing team. And ultimately, we decided that each category of BMPs, in this case, the citing BMPs for prioritization for citing, each category would list all the citations. And one reason was because of what I call the no-brainers. For example, there's almost 100 different documents out there that say where you can put your wind farm in an area that's already disturbed or degraded. And so if we cited each BMP separately, we'd have a string of like 100 citations. This particular slide is an amalgamation of about 15 other different sources, ranging from the BLMs, again, programmatic environmental impact statements for wind and solar, and other guidance documents written by folks like the National Wind Coordinating Collaborative, the Wyoming Game and Fish, Audubon. And these are the BMPs that rose to the top in terms of lands that should be avoided for wind and solar development. I'm not going to go through all these either, but again, I think that it's a powerful way to do it, where our BMPs are an amalgamation of many other sources. So when a conservationist is advocating, say through the NEPA process, that an energy installation be sited here and not there, it's not just that advocate's opinion, and it's not even just putting forth the best management practices issued by the National Wind Coordinating Collaborative or the BLM, but rather here's a guiding list of places to cite or not cite renewables that are agreed upon by all these different entities. So after the citing BMPs, we get into the real meat of the document, which I call the critter categories, where effectively all the BMPs are organized in terms of addressing the needs of, well, first sage grouse, then raptors, all the other birds not covered by the first two categories, bats, general wildlife, this is where the ungulates come in, and site hydrology, including soils and veg. This last category is focused primarily on solar installations. The bird and bat categories are specific more to wind farms, and the wildlife category covers both solar and wind developments. And the best way to kind of lay out the organization of the critter categories is to just go through one of them. So I chose the bats. And for each of our critter categories, whether bats or general wildlife or soils, veg, they all have the exact same organization. So first we have the citing BMPs needed for that critter. Then we go into the planning and pre-construction BMPs specific to that category, then the construction and operation BMPs, and finally the monitoring BMPs. I was actually able to fit all four of the bat citing BMPs on this slide, and I don't even know if you can read them, but they basically tell you where to cite, or rather not cite, turbines if you want to be careful to not get into trouble with bat fatalities down the line. For the rest of my subcategories, I just chose one example BMP to give you kind of a flavor of what's included in those subcategories. So for the planning and pre-construction BMPs for bats, this is talking about the kind of surveys you want to do in terms of time of day and season. And I'll note that since our BMPs are very wildlife driven, a lot of these planning and pre-construction BMPs are talking about the kind of surveys you would need to do to get very general information on distribution and or density of your key species in the project area. The BMP I have here for construction and operation talks about the cut-in speed of turbines. And I'll note that in this subcategory, in all of our critter categories, it's the construction and operation BMPs where you'll see some of the actual numbers or kind of hard thresholds, because we know a lot about, for example, that you shouldn't be creating large disturbances near sage grouse, lek, or breeding habitat from March 1st to June 15th. Or that you shouldn't be doing wide-scale solar array development on slopes greater than 20%, that sort of thing. The BMP here for the bat monitoring talks about the fatality surveys and what season you'll be doing those and for how many years. And one note on our document, again, it's very kind of science-focused. We always recommend that you use the same kind of surveys, both pre-construction and post-construction, in terms of trying to get at those density and or distribution estimates for your key species, so you can have comparable data to look at before and after construction. And then at the end of, and at the beginning of each critter category, we have lumped all the citations to all the literature and other BMPs and guidance documents where all of our BMPs came from. And then following each critter category, we have the justification section where we have all the literature laid out so that you can basically look at any of the BMPs we put forward, and you can go through and read and see where it came from. For example, in the justification section for the bats, you can read how, you know, you have this kind of bat fatality when you have this many wind turbines this close to a bat hibernacula or a wetland where they like to feed, or, you know, the reasons why you get into more trouble with turbines during the migration season, and that sort of thing. And that's basically the gist of our document. We do have a section towards the end that talks about adaptive management and the role that can play with planning and especially monitoring things like wind farms and having your data feed back into the management of the wind turbines. We also have a section on needed research, because we sure went through all the literature on the impacts of wind and solar on wildlife. And again, even though our chief audience is the conservation community, one thing I've been surprised to hear is, you know, how some of the agencies are already using the document, such as the Nevada, BLM, EPA out in California. And, you know, if nothing else, I think that our document can help the agencies anticipate some of the issues that are going to be brought forth, you know, very strongly by some of the environmental groups in terms of siting. And I think that could be a good and helpful thing. And basically, you know, we see this document as being a living document, being iterative. We're basically only publishing hard copies as we get money to do so. So a couple hundred here and there. We see it as being living on the web, and I welcome any, you know, feedback any of you have with any expertise in this area as we continue to update the document, especially as the new science comes in. As the more projects are built, the more studies will be done. And that's what I got today. I wanted to thank our chief partners in this effort, Western Resource Advocates and Utah Clean Energy, and the list of folks who helped in terms of consultation, expert peer review. There's a couple in the room today. Editing, the list is huge, so it's been definitely a group effort. And that's all.
How closely do your guidelines follow the most recent Fish and Wildlife Service wind power guidelines?
Right, so the Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines played tremendously in this document. You probably know Diana Whittington and Jeep Pagel. Okay, so am I pronouncing his last name right? Jeep Pagel? When he saw the first version, he said he threw it against the wall. And so he and Diana, between the two of them, had me do a complete and total rewrite on the Raptor section, and they fed me tons of information, and that's one reason it's the longest section in the document. So it's basically verbatim what the service wanted in there. Right, I'm supposed to be repeating the questions for the transcript. So the first question was obviously about Fish and Wildlife Service's role in improving the draft, and the next question is about incoming new information, most notably the BLM's final solar PEIS. I'm hoping our friends at the Wilderness Society, Alex, who I'm sure you know, Dewey, however you pronounce his last name, will basically feed me the rewrite that we need on that portion of our document to be part of the next iteration or draft. So that's how a lot of things work in my world as a service provider to the other conservationists in our community. We have to help each other and work together a lot.